Hello, I'm Mike Urton. Welcome to the Common Network channel. And this is going to be a two-part series on a study that I did entitled Caring for Cross-Cultural Ministry Workers in North America. The reason for this study is that there have been many that have been done for overseas missionaries, but no corresponding studies that I'm aware of done for diaspora missionaries working in the United States or in Canada. So there's also an article that goes along with this study that we will put in the description section below. And by way of introduction, this particular study was participated in by 10 missionaries working among Muslims in North America. So even though we focused on the Muslim community, there are lessons to be learned for others working in diaspora ministry, especially among unreached people groups. There were 10 participants who took part in this study. They responded via email, and they were asked to list their top 2 or 3 stressors in ministry. And so those stressors were culled together, and the 5 categories were determined for what they were. And so they were face-to-face ministry, support raising, relationship with the sending organization, spiritual warfare, and then other stressors, which are ones that were mentioned maybe once, but were not mentioned again, but worth noting in our study. But before we get into those categories, we're going to define some terms: stress and burnout. So let's start with stress. Ronald Koteski, who does a lot of missionary care, he and his wife, he defines stress this way: a process involving environmental events, which are the stressors, our own reactions to the stress, and the resources we use to cope with the stress. Note that the stress you feel depends both on the events and on your resources. Marjorie Foyle, in her book, Honorably Wounded, offers also 3 different components, just like Ronald Koteski, 3 different components to stress, which are pretty similar: the event itself, appraisal of the event, and coping methods, which flesh out Koteski's definition. She actually defines what each one of those are. The event itself, she says, is usually something external to the individual and out of personal control, both factors determining whether or not it will be stressful. Deciding whether or not a particular circumstance is harmful to us is the appraisal of the event. So is this going to be harmful to me or no, is when you decide if this event is going to affect you. This is followed by the third component of coping methods, which are employed to deal with the situation. So let's talk about burnout. Burnout is when stressors are left to build, or the coping methods to deal with them are overwhelmed. A person can reach burnout. So Foyle puts forth this definition: to deplete oneself, to exhaust one's own physical and mental resources, to wear oneself out, striving to reach some unrealistic expectation imposed by oneself or the values of society. And that can sound a little bit abstract. So here, I think, is Ronald Koteski puts forward a really good word picture of what this looks like. Here's what he says: you find it hard to get up and go to work in the morning. Work used to be exciting, and you used to look forward to what you did with people. But now you're just tired, and it takes a great deal of effort to get out of bed. You wonder what is wrong. Could it be that you are suffering from burnout? Could a really committed missionary burn out? You may only be in your first term. Certainly you couldn't burn out in just a few years, could you? Wouldn't God keep you from burning out? Is it better to burn out than to rust out? What about the old gospel song that says, "Let me burn out for thee, dear Lord"? So, lest we think that this is just a modern phenomenon, let's look at quickly just 2 biblical examples. One would be Moses, and think specifically Numbers 11:10-17, where he and the children of Israel have just come out of Egypt in the Exodus, and they're wandering in the desert, and they're complaining about where's the food, where's the water, and Moses has reached his boiling point. He can't take it anymore, and he cries out to God, and he even says, "Lord, if this is how I'm going to be treated, please have mercy on me and just kill me now. I can't take it anymore." Also Elijah in 1 Kings 19. He had just seen God win an amazing victory over the prophets of Baal, and he then gets a threat from the evil queen Jezebel that she is going to take his life. And so he becomes despondent. He starts to despair. And an angel of the Lord comes and tends to him and tends to his needs and gives him the strength he needs to persevere. And so if Moses and Elijah can experience burnout in their ministries, there's no reason to expect that we won't experience that in ours as well. So let's talk about the first stressor. I mentioned that there were 5 earlier. So the first stressor is face-to-face ministry. And under that is dealing with unstable situations. So an example is dealing with those who come out of a traumatic event. This is going to be especially true for those working with refugees or even immigrants who have had to flee for political or religious persecution or something like that. The lives of these immigrants and refugees are so unstable, ministry to them can also be unstable. As one respondent in this study said, they come for help, then they are gone. Thus, there's a lack of longevity and spiritual results in evangelism and ministry. So refugees and immigrants, they can have very high needs. You can spend a lot of time helping with things like paperwork or language learning, and little time can actually be spent on the spiritual ministry of evangelism and discipleship. Along with that comes dealing with an unstable lifestyle. One respondent reported working with a Muslim background believer, so someone who grew up as a Muslim but has become a follower of Christ. And this particular MBB suffered from extreme paranoia, skepticism of other Arab Christians, and poor decision making that went contrary to advice given. And these decisions led to financial and emotional expenses, according to the missionary that was working with him. A result of ministering to people in these unstable situations can be something called compassion fatigue. And Koteski defines it this way. This is where people feel drained, used up, and overwhelmed by the needs people come with. It is not that you don't want to help, you just don't have what it takes anymore. Also, under face-to-face ministry is the challenge of ministering the gospel to Muslims. And this could be also extended to those who come from other unreached people groups like Hindus and Buddhists. As one respondent said it, he said, family and community is pleasure. By inviting Muslims to follow Christ, one respondent asked this question, down deep, how do Christian workers deal with asking Muslims to make decisions that will lead to persecution? As he points out, the temptation here might be to change the message in order to avoid the problem of persecution for those who convert. And lastly, under this category, there's an extra initiative that has to be taken when working with Muslims and other unreached people groups in North America, because when you're overseas, you're in a country that's either Muslim majority or Hindu majority or Buddhist majority, and so your neighbor is probably a Muslim or a Hindu or a Buddhist. But in North America, it can take a little more effort to try to get into those communities and to build trust and to get to a point where you can really see effective ministry moving forward. So what are some coping methods? As we mentioned before, this is one of the things where stressors can get out of control is when coping methods are overwhelmed. So what are some coping methods that we can use to help in this area of face-to-face ministry? One is firm boundaries. Missionaries should decide how much help they are willing to give on things like paperwork, like language learning, and this should be weighed with their other goals in mind, of how much evangelism and discipleship and the like, Bible studies and these kinds of things that they would like to do. So if you develop that kind of list of goals, that will really help you in defining what kind of ministry you're going to do and not be pushed and pulled for every need that comes up. 2 is empathy and integrity. Now this is handling the issue of community pressure. A combined love and respect for that person and their culture and the family they come from, along with communicating the gospel truthfully and graciously, may ease some of that tension of wanting to compromise the message of the gospel so that you can make it more palatable, so you don't have to, that person doesn't have to face persecution or something like this. Lastly, self-care. Be proactive about taking days off. Take regular scheduled vacations. Indulge in activities that you enjoy. That could be working out, that can be bike riding, that can be book reading, whatever it is, so that you can actually stay recharged and refreshed for the ministry that God has called you to. So that brings part 1 to an end. So in part 2, we will review the last few stressors that were talked about in our study. And again, there will be some resources in the description section below, so make sure that you avail yourselves of that, and thanks for watching.